Hey guys, this is James from TDB bringing you a Inbetweenisode. Today is a non-drinking Inbetweenisode, but I will be sipping a little bit on this tea that I just recorded an episode for a simplified Yan 7542. Thanks again to those guys, Tim and Mike over there, for sending this tea in. And today's topic, I am going to be talking a bit on the interactions of age and pu'erh and how if it makes it expensive or not. So less on the quality of Pu'erh and more on just the specific interactions between those two things. One of the, I think, fairly obvious things that is, I think decently well known in the tea community is the price of Pu'erh is not always directly related to its quality. Of course, those things are probably heavily correlated over time, but there are certain teas that are, I think many would say, pretty poor value, and there are other teas that I think are pretty good value in terms of just like, this is a good quality tea for the amount of money that you're putting in, and this is a tea that is outrageously expensive, even if it might be a good tea for the quality that you're getting, perhaps it's not that great. One well-known factor that you're going to run into when it comes to kind of the relationship of Pu'erh and price, and one way it does differ from other things, is there is a strong labeling factor. And this makes it really easy to search for teas on Taobao or Weidian or different places and be like, okay, this is a tea, and that's like a certain price, a certain year, from a certain vendor, and here's the recipe. This is especially effective when it comes to things like dye tea, big factory tea, but it becomes increasingly less effective as you kind of get into smaller brands and stuff like that. And I think the age plays kind of a different factor when we're talking about factory tea from like the big factories, so like Dai Shagwan, versus even kind of like some of the the brands that have less kind of like the collection investment aspect to it. So even something like Mengku Rongshi, versus like the very, very small boutique brands that are well known versus the small boutique brands that are a lot lesser known too. Everyone's just a little bit different there. So I think when it comes to kind of a specific product that you might be able to look up in a yearbook, those teas tend to have kind of market prices. When it comes to tea, especially from like the mid-2000s, dye tea, dye doesn't necessarily exert much price controls or anything over those teas, at least not to my knowledge. So something like a 2008 dye 8582 is going to be kind of a product of a price of how much of that tea they made and kind of what the demand is of it. So I think one thing that really can get kind of a bit of a confounding variable with these things is the age factor. And that is because the production of Pu'erh just changed a lot over, especially the 2000s, the aughts. Like in the beginning of the aughts, from 2000, they were making a whole lot less tea. So something like the 7542 is, it's a very different beast than something like the 2010 7542 made much, much later. And so the price of those is going to vary. The quality also varies, but I think a lot of it also kind of boils down to the scarcity of it. The tea is very, very scarce when you get down into 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. And so as a result, those teas are very expensive. I think if you were to look at the 2010 7542 and be like, okay, so that tea, when it is now 20 years old, so let's say in 2030, which is only 7 years away, that tea is going to be the same price as the 2003 7542 is now. And I don't think that's going to work that way, and I think a huge reason for that is the scarcity. Even though those teas would be the same age in this sort of hypothetical situation, they made way more tea in the 2010s, so the quality is different, but also, I think perhaps more importantly, the quantity is different as well. It kind of creates a fairly interesting dynamic, especially when the vendor can't kind of slowly raise prices. Now, I think you run into another scenario here too, where age does kind of tend to raise the price. But part of that is because when, so here's scenario number two. When we have a vendor, Western vendors here, boutique vendors, which are not well known on the Eastern market, are good examples here. So places like Y2T, Unot Sourcing, Crimson Lotus, whatever. A lot of these vendors, as each year passes, will kind of have an incentive, if they still have stock from the previous year, to raise the price on that. kind of release the new material at that price. So there's an incentive to buy the younger material because it's cheaper. And personally for me, I tend to do that, especially when it comes to ripe, and I don't care very much about the aging. It's like, what do I care about 1 year as far as this ripe goes? Is it worth 15% to me, or 10%, or whatever it ends up, the kind of the price getting raised ends up being in that year. And for me, it rarely is worth that extra year to pay an extra 10 to 15 or 20% in certain cases. So in those cases, age is kind of slowly raising up, and there is an incentive to buy younger. But I think when you come to kind of these bigger brands that have like these big giant marketplaces, teas are being sold by the GN, and people are buying them and dealing them. And really, we as Westerners or the Western market are small potatoes. We don't really impact the market of demand. I mean, we add a little bit to it, but it's hardly noticeable when it comes to the size there. Whereas like vendors that are focused on selling in the West, it's like we are the market there. We are the big part of it. So, and they also have control of that kind of incoming supply as well as the existing supply, so they can raise those prices over time. So I think there's a couple different dynamics that do occur there. And I'm less familiar with kind of the practices of Dai in kind of like the last few years. Like, it's possible that they could hold on to stock and kind of like try to do something similar to that. I don't totally know if that's occurring. The other thing that can happen here is the other factor that is often mentioned here is storage. And in my opinion, this tends to be less important when it comes to kind of the price of tea, but very important to the product that you end up getting. If you're someone like me that does like their tea a little bit on the wetter end, then its storage is definitely something I'm paying attention to, not only when I'm drinking the tea, but when I'm reading descriptions and trying to figure out if this is something I'm going to enjoy, because it's a very important factor in kind of how the tea comes out. You will hear stories about how like some random 1999 Dai 7542 or something like that is much more expensive when it's dry stored versus wet stored. But I think a lot of those things also come down to just that kind of quantity and scarcity there, rather than the actual quality of the tea. If like the 1999 Dai, if dry storage then was obviously not as popular as it is now, and if 1/10 of the tea was dry stored from the get-go, whereas 9/10 of it was more traditionally stored, then of course there's going to be a higher demand for that 10% of tea, because there's just a whole lot less of it. And if the demand for dry storage tea in that case would probably exceed kind of what the supply would be. So it wouldn't be surprising to me that exists. I think for the most part in the Western market, you don't need to worry about those interactions so much when it comes to kind of price. I think storage is mostly important, less in determining the price and more in just kind of what you are after and what you would like to see. And it becomes very interesting when kind of these specific factors of like, it's like, and this is where age really, in my opinion, tends to not matter so much at all, is when vendors are selling teas that could be 10, 15, 20 years old, but they're not well known. And part of the reason they're not well known could be it's not good. But there's also a very strong chance that it's not well known just for kind of random reasons. It's a tea that never caught on. It's not a dye production, or it's a dye production that was made in huge quantities, something like that, but maybe it's better than its kind of reputation. And if a tea doesn't sell, then there's probably not a huge incentive to bump up the price. And this is really where you kind of can find a certain value in things like that. Not necessarily everything is going to be a bargain. And in fact, there's a lot of shitty tea that sells for small prices because it doesn't sell, and because when people try it, it's not very good. But you can also occasionally find stuff that really can hit the spot. And that's where kind of like the white paper bargain hunters fall in here. And this all applies to aged oolong as well, by the way. So that's why kind of aged oolong, unless you're talking about something that like won a gold medal and like some Dongding competition in the 1980s or something like that, is kind of a price that could vary a whole lot, because if you're not relying on kind of the pedigree of the tea with like it's a dry stored 7542 from 2001, there's going to be an inherent demand for that. If you're relying more just on like the tea and if you can sell it, or like based off samples or a number of factors, then the price really can change quite a bit. So you could have tea that's like about the same quality that is like significantly more expensive, depending on where you are kind of buying it from. All right, so that ends this little rant on age and making Pu'erh expensive or not. I think because the 2000s in particular, and really the Pu'erh chain industry has just been extremely dynamic over the course of the last 30 years. I think there's a lot of factors that play into it that you could look at besides age. And I think as the Pu'erh industry has perhaps stabilized a bit, I think like the difference you're going to see in age for something like in 2020 versus like 2025, for instance, is probably going to be kind of a lot less. I think that the age itself is probably a little bit overrated as far as a factor that kind of adds significant price to the tea. Okay, that's rant over. Let me know how you enjoyed it. I hope to see you guys all soon, and I will see you all next time. Cheers.